Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
I'd like to welcome everyone to Four Rivers Church. If you're in Paducah, Calvert City, Eddyville, or watching this on the internet, thank you so much for being a part. We are in the 3rd week of the teaching series, Presents. As we approach the Christmas season, we're reading an extremely Christmassy story from the Old Testament before Jesus was born and died on the cross, from the book of Ruth. We're looking at relationships and what it really means to be present in someone's life. To give you a little bit of backup here, just let me remind you, we started with a woman named Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws, okay? The 2 daughter-in-laws and Naomi lived in a foreign land away from Bethlehem, and they lost both Naomi's husband and both of Naomi's sons. So now 3 women in a land where they cannot support themselves, in a place where they are helpless and alone, and they choose to go back to Bethlehem, where Naomi is from. And even when they get there, they face struggles and trials, because you see, in their culture and in that time, without a man, without a husband, even though Naomi's family had owned lots of land and had plenty of money, she personally could not claim it until somehow there was an heir. What that means is that either Naomi, who is now an older woman, has to remarry, or one of her daughter-in-laws has to marry on behalf of her. And ultimately what they need is a baby, And if they can have a baby boy, that's even better, because ultimately that child can claim the land that Naomi rightfully owns so that they can be provided for and have food and not be in want. And so this is a huge journey for these three ladies. Now, the journey for one of the ladies ends fast. She does not go back to Bethlehem with her mother-in-law. She stays with her family where she was in her country, in Moab. But Ruth, the other daughter-in-law, goes with Naomi, and the two of them travel back to Bethlehem. And when they get there, here's what happens. Ruth is the younger one. We don't know her exact age, but she would be a younger woman. Her husband of only a few years has died, and she realizes that if anyone's going to bring food home for these two women, it's her. And so she goes out to the fields of a wealthy man named Boaz who lived in that area. She goes to his field, and he lets her pick crops from the side of the fields. And so she does that. He even kind of takes a liking to her, thinks of her as a sweet young lady, and he protects her. He has the men who guard his field watch over her. He lets her hang out with other women that he trusts and knows. And in the long run, what happens is that she becomes kind of one step closer to Boaz as someone who's going to care for her. What we begin to see in the second chapter is that Ruth is interested. You know what I mean? Guys, have you ever, I want to ask the men in the room, Calvert City, Ediville, guys, have you ever had a woman interested, but you were totally clueless, like you don't get it? Like she's interested, but you have no clue at all? Well, that's Boaz. He doesn't get it at all. He's just doing his thing. He's an older man. She's a younger woman. It's like, you know what I mean? Like right over his head. He has no idea. And so what happens in that second chapter is that Ruth will come home to Naomi, and Naomi says, "What happened today?" And Ruth says, "He didn't notice me again. He didn't notice me again. He didn't notice me again." And so we come to the third chapter, and what might be the weirdest story in all of the Bible. I'm going to tell you tonight a story that when I tell it and as I say it, I think this is so strange, what we're about to hear. The advice that an older woman, Naomi, is about to give to a younger woman, Ruth, about how to hook a man, okay? That's ultimately what's being told here. And I just want to go ahead and say that although this is the Bible, and this is in the Bible, we might want to look at this passage as more of a descriptive passage versus a proscriptive passage. And what that means is that the Bible's going to tell us how it happened and what they did. That does not necessarily mean that this is the way we should do it. The scripture never says, hey, follow Naomi's guidance at all times. For the young ladies in the crowd, I'm going to tell you that if I were your daddy, I would not want you to do exactly what Ruth does in this story, okay? So we need to go into that and understand. Now, having said that, we're going to have a little fun with this passage because this is a pretty crazy story, okay? So you've already seen the video earlier. You kind of know what's happening. Let me just tell you the story. Naomi sets Ruth down and says, okay, Ruth, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. Here's what you need to do. Ruth, there's going to be a get-together tonight at the threshing floor. It's a place where men would be working. They would be taking the grain, the barley that they had harvested from the fields. They're going to be dividing up the good parts and the bad parts. They're going to have this big pile of grain, and at the end of the day, they're going to have a great big meal, and they're going to have drinks, and they're going to laugh, and they're going to have a good time. They're going to have kind of a godly version of a party together, and then they're all going to be happy. The word merry is used. They're going to be merry, you know? And at that point, here's what Naomi tells Ruth. Naomi says, Ruth, here's what you do. Take a bath. Can I just say, ladies, that's a great place to start right there. Take a bath. It's a good thing. It's in the Bible. We all ought to do it on a daily basis, right? Take a bath. And then he says, smell good. Put on something that smells. You know, she's from Moab. He's like, go back and get that greatest scent that your mama taught you how to use to smell pretty. So you're going to clean up. You're going to smell pretty. And then she says, put on your nicest garment. Okay? In other words, doll yourself up, babe. Like, fix it up. You know, like, get ready because you're about to go to the party. That's what you're going to do. You're going to go to the party, and we're going to see if we can't get Boaz's attention. Now, ladies in the room, I know that you have practiced this. As a young girl, you practiced this with the Barbie dolls, you know? And I want you to understand something. The guys, we're clueless. Like we have no idea what you're thinking, what you're doing, none at all. Like we totally and completely miss this, okay? So it's interesting what we're about to hear from Naomi, an older woman, telling Ruth how to do this. She says, I want you to go to the party. I want you to smell good. I want you to look good. And I want you to be there at the party. And oh, by the way, kind of time out, she says, don't bother the man. This is a funny quote from Scripture. Don't bother the man until after he is finished eating and drinking and he is now merry. Like don't interrupt the chicken wings. Like don't get in the way of that. If he sets a plate of food down in front of him, don't walk up and, be talking buddy. If he's watching TV with his friends, if he's hanging out with his buddies and talking, just leave it alone, okay? Just let him do what the guys are going to do, and you need to just be there and be beautiful and be attractive. That's what Naomi is telling Ruth to do. Now, some of the ladies are thinking, I don't want to chase after him. I'm not going to chase after a man. If a man doesn't notice me, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you, I agree with that. I don't think you ought to chase after a man, but I do think it's a good idea sometimes to get in his way. You know what I'm saying? Like, make him walk around you, because that way we guys, we're not that smart in this story. You need to understand. Guys, single guys, even single guys who know they need to be married, they're like, looking for a wife, looking for a wife, looking for a wife. There's like one over there and one over there. They're not seeing that. They're not noticing that until some young, beautiful bride goes like, I'm right here, and then if he has to go around you, see, all of a sudden he starts to notice, like, there's one right there. There's one right there. And so this is what begins to happen. She says, go to the party, looking right, smelling right, attitude right. And when the time comes, now this is when it gets weird. She says, when the time comes, wait until after he has eaten, had something to drink, feeling good, happy, and he's going to lay down and go to sleep. And this is the part, ladies, that is descriptive. I don't totally understand this passage. I don't quite see how an older lady gives this particular advice to a younger lady, but let's just take our time and walk through this, okay? She says, walk into the room where he is asleep and uncover his feet and lay down at his feet. And when he wakes up in the middle of the night and realizes that there is a young and beautiful woman who looks good and smells good at the foot of his bed, ask him what you can do for him. And then Naomi says, do whatever he asks. And I only have sons, but if I had daughters, I'd be going, huh? Like what? Like seriously? Because lots of guys, I know they read this passage and their mind goes to all different kinds of places. They're like, I wish my wife would act like that. Like make me a good plate of food, look great, give me something to drink, let me go to bed, and then meet me in the bedroom and go, what do you want? Like, right? But you don't misunderstand what's being said here. I want to tell you the backstory. The backstory is this. In Jewish heritage and culture, when a woman's husband died, at that point, for the most part in that culture, she was in a state of helplessness. It was very difficult for a woman to deal with the death of her husband. At that point, there's something called a family redeemer. Family redeemer is the man who is of closest brotherhood to the man who died. Usually it would be his brother, maybe his cousin, something like that. And that man would graciously and wonderfully take the wife of his deceased brother or the wife of his deceased cousin, and he would make sure that she is cared for. Sometimes they would do that in a totally like friendship kind of way. He would just care for her needs. Other times he would marry her, sometimes so that he could give her an heir or a child. This is even in some ways the beginning of what we know as polygamy, where a man would have more than one wife. Oftentimes it wasn't that he went looking for more than one wife. It was that he married one, and then because of famine or war or something else, many of his brothers or cousins' wives were widowed, and he would take those wives under his wing as a protection. That is ultimately what Ruth is asking Boaz to do. She lifts up his blanket, she lays down at his feet, and then she asks him when he wakes up, he says, what can I do for you? Or what do you want me to do? And she says, will you protect me? Will you put me under your wing? This is what she's basically saying. Would you be willing to consider asking me to marry you? Now, in their culture, women didn't propose. I know that happens sometimes in our culture. That's not what she's doing. She's not proposing. She's proposing that he should propose. That's what she's doing. Ladies, you know what I'm talking about? Like she is suggesting that he should suggest this. She's saying to him, if you were to ask me to marry you, I would say yes. That's what she's saying by coming into his room and laying down at his feet and being there, right? So there are lots of overtones here. This story is at least a PG-13 rated story where people are wondering what's happening in this room, what's really going on in this room. And here's what I could tell you. I know that lots of folks have probably said many things about what she did or didn't do. The scripture's very clear. She doesn't sin with him in this room. There's not anything like that going on. She is, in a very beautiful and gracious way, saying, I would like to be your wife. Now, for those of us who only know American culture, let me explain something to you. To the rest of the world, marriage isn't all about sex. Dating, not all about sex. Relationships between a man and woman, not all about sex. It's one thing, but it's not the primary thing, and many times. She's not there to talk to him about sexuality. She's there to talk to him about love, about commitment, and about relationship. She's there to say to him, if you will take care of me, I will serve you, and we will love each other, and I will be your wife. It's a beautiful, beautiful love story that's happening in this story. So here's what happens. He basically, like the good, godly man that Boaz is, goes, whoa, woman, you can't be in here. It's dark. It's late. You don't need to be in my room. You see what I'm saying? Like in the way that if your daughter was dating him, he acted the way you'd want him to act. You know, like you were way too pretty and smell way too nice to be in my bedroom at night. You know, like I'm going to step away from you. And he ends up saying, I'm going to let you stay here the rest of the night, but I don't want people to think that you're the kind of girl that you're really not. And so I want you to sneak out of here early in the morning and go home so that nobody sees you and nobody thinks that you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. And so he sneaks her out early and gets her back home safe, making sure she's protected and cared for. In the process, he goes further than that. He even gives her plenty of food because he doesn't want her to go home hungry. He sends her enough barley wrapped up in a sheet so that she can go back to her mother-in-law and feed the two of them for several days. At this point, what happens is that he tells her, I'm actually not the first man in line to have the option to marry you. There's another redeemer that's closer in relation to your husband than I am. And the honorable, right, and good thing to do is that I need to give him the option to marry you versus me. Now, see, there are several things going on here. First of all, she's a young, beautiful woman, right? She's a young, beautiful woman, so lots of men would have been interested in marrying her. Secondly, this young, beautiful woman happens to own a lot of land, and whatever man marries her gets it. Okay? So all of a sudden now you have two motivations. Boaz, we learn later, secretly loves this woman and would love to marry her. And yet he's honorable and right enough that he's unwilling to do what he shouldn't do. He's not going to take another man's wife. And so he says, I will go and talk to the other man, and I will give him the opportunity to redeem you first. And if he chooses not to, then I will. And at that point, he sends Ruth home. Ruth goes home to Naomi. The story ends with Naomi going, what happened? What happened? And Ruth goes, nothing happened. What do you mean nothing happened? Well, something happened. He told me that he would like to redeem me, but he's going to talk to this other man first. And then Naomi ends by saying, be patient. You've done what you can do. You have put yourself in front of this man. You have gotten his attention. You have let him know that your intentions are godly and beautiful. So be patient and wait. And this is a good man. He will handle this soon. And you'll have to come back next week to see the rest of the story. Now that I've told you the story, let me just make a few points about relationships and the presence that we have of being in one another's relationship in this world. This entire series, as we approach the Christmas season, is about looking into my life and your life and saying, how can God be more present in me? And because of that, how can I be more present in the lives of other people? And ultimately, instead of just giving presents, how can I be present for the people that I love and that love me and that need me? And here are a few things that we can learn from this story. The first thing is this. We live in a world where being liberated is kind of we think of it as the good thing, right? And we should. There are great things about liberation, great things about the fact that different groups of people are treated better than they have been ever in history, different things about equality and people being loved and being seen as valuable under the eyes of God. That's all great. When we talk about liberation, that's good. But what also happens from that word is that sometimes if I think, man, I got to be standing on my own feet and I've got to make sure that I'm treated the same as everybody else and I got to be strong and I've got to make it my own way and I've got to earn it myself and you've got to do all that yourself. In the long run, one of the side effects of liberation is also loneliness. Here's what I mean. If I'm not subordinate to you in any way and you're not subordinate to me in any way and I don't need you in any way and you don't need me in any way, then ultimately I can not need anything else and I can stand on my own 2 feet and I can be responsible for me so much so that I don't have anybody else in my life that really matters. Pastor Stoney, one of our other leaders here today, we were talking about how as a child, both of us had people say things like this to us. Say things like this: you don't need to care what anybody else thinks of you. Well, that sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? Like you need to have self-confidence and not care what anybody else thinks about you. But then we also thought, there's a flip side to that. How in the world can I live a good life and not really, genuinely, honestly, not care what anybody else thinks about me? You know what? I got to tell you something. I care what a lot of people think about me. I do. I care what my parents think about me. I care what my brother thinks about me. I care what my wife thinks about me. I could talk for hours about how much I care what my kids think about me. I care what my coworkers think about me. I care what the people of this church think about me. I care what my next door neighbor thinks about me. I care what the sheriff in the county I live in thinks about me. You know what I mean? Like I care what people think about me. And it's not that I'm going to walk around like weak and wounded if somebody doesn't like me. It's not that. But we live in a world where we need each other. And no man is an island, and I don't get to stand all off on my own. And I'm not completely and totally liberated from you. God did not create us to be individuals. God created us to be families and to be groups and to be together. It's why the Bible says things like one man sharpens another man. Iron sharpens iron. It's why God says things like a man will leave his family and join together with his wife and the two will become one flesh. And it's why the scriptures teach us about the way we ought to treat our family and the way we ought to treat our children. Because God is so much more concerned about the way the two of us relate together than He is about whether or not I'm liberated and all alone and on my own. It's not a weak thing to need another human being. It's a human thing to need another human being. It's not a weak thing to be subordinate to authority or to care what somebody else thinks or to work as a team. It's a godly thing to do those things. Even God Himself exists in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He is not liberated. He is together, loving, relating to one another. 3 in 1, 1 in 3. That's the first thing. A lesson we can learn from this is that the goal is not that Ruth should stand on her own feet and pull herself up by her bootstraps and make it happen on her own. The goal is that Ruth would know how and when to connect with the right people so that together they can find happiness and joy. Make sense? The second thing is this. In this story, Boaz is the Redeemer. He's the Redeemer. He's the one who didn't have a dog in the race, so to speak. Like this is not his problem. These two women were married to two men who went to a place they didn't need to be, and they died when they got there, and Boaz didn't make any of those decisions, and he wasn't involved in any of those things, and now these two women are hungry and need somebody to help them, and it was not his problem. And he makes it his problem. He becomes the Redeemer. I want to ask you something. By show of hands, Calvary City, Paducah, Edival, even if you're sitting at home on your computer on the internet, raise your hand how many of you have families that need redeeming? Anybody? Yeah, me too. Have you ever thought about the fact that maybe you can be your family's redeemer? Maybe you can be the one who reaches into your family and says, I didn't cause this problem. I didn't mess you up. I'm not the one who got you all messed up. I didn't take money from you. I didn't smack you. I didn't lie to you. Or maybe you're thinking I actually did some of that stuff. Whatever. Whether it's your problem or not, if it's your family, it's your problem. And we have to be the people who redeem our families. Here's what I'm saying. Our church is represented by a lot of different kinds of people, okay? But in the families of our church, there are lots of things that have become realities, right? We as a church, we face struggles in relationships. We face marital problems. We face trouble. In our church, we have a lot of families that face parenting problems and behavioral issues and disobedient kids from time to time. Some of us do. In our church, we face addiction and self-medication and struggle. In our church, we have people who have grown up and faced disappointment or in some way, some sort of depression. I'm saying to you this, your children do not have to face the exact same problems that you face. They don't have to inherit from you the same problems that maybe you inherited from your kids. You can be your family's redeemer and say, it stops with me. It stops with me. There's hatred in my family. I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to take Christmas time. I'm going to get together. I'm going to confess my sin to my brother or my sister or my mom. I'm going to ask for their forgiveness, and then I'm going to help them do the same thing for everybody else. I'm going to seek relational redemption in my family. You can be your family's redeemer, just as Boaz is in this story. And then the last thing that I want you to get is that relationships require patience. I don't know about you, but there's nothing harder than relationships. Nothing harder than relationships, right? I mean, even when you love these people, sometimes you still want to smack them, right? I know this is true. Okay, the people you love the most, are sometimes the ones that hurt you the most. The ones that you have to bite that lip and not say what you're thinking and walk out of the room for a moment and all of those things. And I know it's not like sometimes we want it to be. Like we want relationships to be a math problem, right? If we could just change the number, make it right, equals out, everything's done, right? It'd be awesome, but that's not the way it works. You see, when you offend someone, this takes time. When you hurt someone, this takes time. When you've been harmed, this takes time. When trust is lost, this takes time. When all of a sudden there are issues that are there, it takes a lot longer to get rid of them than it did to create them. And so we have to realize, just as Naomi tells Ruth at the end of this chapter, be patient. Do the right thing today. Don't expect it to change anybody tomorrow. Do the right thing tomorrow. Do the right thing the next day. Do the right thing the day after that. Don't expect it to change anybody tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. But you keep doing the right thing and you continue doing the right thing and you be patient. Because ultimately, God is and will and can and is going to use you to redeem your family and to make changes in those around you and in the relationships that you have with the people that you've been put on this earth to love. And if we will be patient and we will wait and we will give God time and we will keep doing the right thing over and over and over, we'll be amazed at what it is that God can do in our lives and in our families. This is a beautiful story, you guys. A beautiful story about how God is beginning to redeem two women who are helpless and scared and hungry and innocent and good. And God is going to use a man named Boaz to be their redeemer. I'll tell you more about it next week. Would you pray with me?